Hey, welcome to the channel. My name is Jason, and here I talk about all things story. And the story I'm talking about today is one of my own. Yes, we have reached episode 35 of Worth 1000 Words, the series where I write a 1,000 word short story based on a piece of artwork without an outline. And today I return to my darker roots. Now, I'm not going to say this is a very horrific story or gory story, but there are some dark elements, and that dark element is H.P. Lovecraft. So you will see it shortly, but just the way that this artwork is rendered is just completely masterful. I love it. The artist, she doesn't have much on her ArtStation profile, but I can only imagine she's going to be in very high demand. She has this kind of classical style, but it's also modern at the same time. And I really love it when I find artists that bridge that gap. They're concept artists, but they do utilize the techniques, or at least to my amateur eyes, of the old masters. And for this piece of artwork, I had to find a very Lovecraftian soundtrack. So I literally typed in Lovecraft music, and I found a band called Halgrath, and the album is called The Whole Path of War and Acceptance. So I have to say this was a great accompaniment to the writing process, and it really got me in the headspace, and I think that's really important for me. I don't know, if you're a writer, do you write to music? Let me know in the comments. Are you like me? Do you pick a new one every single time? I feel like it's very important to choose one that fits the story. So without further ado, let's check out this week's artwork. This week's artwork is titled Nameless Creature, and it is by an illustrator named Tatiana Kruprianova from St. Petersburg, Russia. Why did I pick this one? Well, if you didn't know me, if I didn't mention this already, I'm a huge Lovecraft fan. And in the description, she says that Lovecraft's stories were her inspiration for this. And I have to agree, this is very Lovecraftian. It plays with his metamorphosis of humans into elder beings or creatures of the sea. And I really love the atmosphere. I love the colors. I love everything about it. And I know I make fun of a lot of illustrations where people are just looking off into the distance, but this one really works for me. It looks like someone who is reminiscing about something or lamenting about something. Maybe what she once was. I don't know. But everything about this I love. From the color palette to the subject matter. So Tatiana, thank you so much for bringing this amazing illustration to me, or at least me finding it, so I can discover the story. All right, let's see what I came up with. She had a name once. The sky wouldn't tell her. Textureless, and hovered above the sea with apathy. The sea wouldn't tell her. Full of texture, it frothed unintelligibly in a language she had yet to learn. The birds wouldn't tell her, for they frolicked both in air and water, allied with both. The dock stood silent in decay, when it should have been bellowing its misery, for it had become a carcass, an old scab, picked at until even the wound it protected bled no more. She moved across the gray sand, because walking would be a lie. She supposed there was another word for it, but she had still to attribute herself to such things. The birds avoided her, as they should. The water, too. Inching closer to it, she tested its sentience. Sheets of it, clothed in foam, retreated no matter how she configured herself. So many configurations. She hadn't counted, had been sickened by it, even looking at it. Them. They slithered, squirmed, writhed, all hideous words that brought bile to her throat. Metaphorically, of course. The disgust was a remnant of what she used to be, who she used to be, or was she still her? In some regard, she was. The thoughts could become tangible. She would make them so. If she could become this, then anything was possible. These thoughts drew her closer to the dock where something waited, something tangible. The birds in water watched her, the sky. Their many eyes on her back were itches she couldn't reach, content to observe her agony in their squawks and crashes and gales. How could they keep it from her? After the nibbles of bread, the billow of her hair, the cut of her thighs. She stopped, mere strides from the dock, remembering what strides were. She looked down, feeling the sand between her toes, how it molded to her arched foot, sinking at the heel and ball. A swirl of black looked back at her, moving of its own accord, an entity both separate and one with her. Her throat burned with acid, but she swallowed air. She found the waves' mist avoided her as well, and, in doing so, revealed a barnacled rope tied to the dock, severed by the sea. Thousands upon thousands of bites, weathering it away, fiber by fiber, two severed ends, slaves to the whims of the current. Severed, as she had been, then regrown, again and again, multitudes, enslaved, as she had been, then given agency. Or perhaps it was all an illusion, and she was part of the colorless symphony, merely lighter and darker shades. The rope ends tapered as the water coursed over them, through them. Her scalp chilled. A spray of water, the wind spreading it over her scalp and icy fingers. She touched it. The flesh cold, the skull soft beneath, except for lines, scars, disturbances. She removed her hand and wiped it on her gown, one that flowed like... She couldn't think of it. Atop the dock now, the sea finally spoke. It told her of a man, not a lover or friend, a caretaker. Footprints it couldn't wash away, a hull it couldn't shatter, tied to a dock it couldn't splinter. And when it wasn't, it was master of that sea, cutting through it like a knife, using it against itself. It would go as far as it wished, perhaps to the other side of the world, to another world, where there was no color, just shades, from white to black, where promises might be found, gifts. She felt a weight on her arm. That weight settled against her wrist, heavy. It tugged her down, drawn by a force stronger than her, but not stronger than what she had become. She lifted it, regarded it with eyes that both knew and didn't know. It hummed with life, sent ripples over her skin as if water. It told her of a girl on a beach who liked to watch the water, to dance in the waves, to sing to the wind. A girl who enjoyed the stormy skies and the chaos they brought, because that chaos drove everyone else from the shore, and she could be alone to bask in its power. A power given to it by the stars, unseen but there, in a sea far bigger than this one, in a place and time far more ancient. One that beckoned to her with many, many arms full of many, many gifts, promises. She said yes, had said yes. And the stars had answered with everything she had never wanted. She threw her arm to be rid of it, but her hand was too wide. She pulled, skin sliding, tearing, until she could take it no more. There, she cried. Tears were a memory, but remember, memories were tangible. Could be, but not today. So the memory was all she had. At least she could still close her eyes. When that darkness reminded her too much of the night sky that had brought all the pain with the gift that bound her, she opened her eyes. A bird, dark of feather and long of beak, perched on a dock post, cocked its head. She opened her mouth to speak to it, but only water came. She would have given it crumbs if she had any, but her arm was shackled behind her back because she couldn't look at it, held there by her other in case the stars chose to utter their false promises. She let the wind take her gown, flutter it about her chest, a useless artifact from a time she wished she could make whole. Free of it, she left the dock, the severed ropes, the beach. The waves did not shun her. They welcomed her as the stars had once, as they still did now, fallen, anchored to her wrist, to usher her to a place as deep and as black as the place where she had left her name. So sometimes I get lucky, and the the name of the artwork, as plain as it may seem, really gives me an idea of how to start this and maybe what could be at the heart of the story. And so, because it's called Nameless Creature, when you look at it from an artistic perspective, it seems like the artist just used that because they didn't have a very unique name. But it was great for me because I started with a name. She had a name once. And if you've ever read any Lovecraft stories, you'll know that there are some transformations that happen. And so I think that that's what was in the back of my head as I was writing this. I wasn't sure how I was going to go about doing it or like what this woman's story was. And hopefully it's a woman. That's the vibe I got from it as a female with that back. So hopefully I got it right. But anyway, regardless, it is a female. I decided it was a female. So I was really kind of biding my time here. I was describing the sea and the clouds because it's such a beautiful painting. I love just the brush strokes and the composition and so I thought I would spend time there because it looks like this person or this character, this creature is looking out to sea for some reason. Almost remembering like why would this person or this creature be on this dock that is just rotten. So that's initially what I thought of is that, okay, well, where is this going to be? Is this going to be the start of the piece or the end of the piece? It actually ended up being somewhere toward the end, right before the final conclusion. And I made use of the item. So I'm always looking for elements or cool little aspects of these pieces to somehow bring some character in. So here, what do we have? We have this bracelet on this woman's head. We have some kind of odd, I don't know what it is, if it's like netting or wounds on the scalp. It was hard for me to tell exactly what it was. But those are the only two elements, really. I mean, besides the obvious, the tentacles. I didn't quite know what I wanted to do with that. I said, okay, there's a bracelet. There looks like there should be some significance because this creature is, or this woman creature is almost fully a monster. And so it's strange that she would wear clothing or have any kind of jewelry, and so I kept that at the back of my mind. As you see in the writing here, what I wanted to do is kind of create a fear. So she's on the beach, she's walking or writhing, slithering, whatever you want to call it, to this dock. And so the water avoided her, the birds avoided her, because as you know from my artwork introduction, this was inspired by Lovecraft. And being a massive Lovecraft fan, I had to start adding those elements in, right? That this creature is more than a creature. It is sort of like a child of the stars or some kind of infinite being, or at least spawned of one. And so that's what I was doing. I was playing with that. I was also playing with, you can see here how she started talking about, because walking would be a lie, there's so many ways to configure herself, meaning that she has all these tentacles to deal with. And I tried my best to not say tentacle. And I don't think I said tentacle in this entire story, which I will give myself a pat on the back for, because there are tentacles clearly there. But I wanted to avoid them. I wanted to create her perception of what they were as this hideous, gross thing that she had become. And then I was playing with the idea of that she changed. She wasn't always this way, but she was human once. And so I wanted to play with these, thoughts could become tangible. She would make it so if she could become this, then anything was possible. Now, obviously, that's not correct, but in her mind, she's kind of creating this hyperbole of what she can do, or what she wishes she could do. This next area, the birds and water washed through the sky. Their many eyes on her back were itches she couldn't reach. So I wanted her to feel vulnerable as well. So not only is she powerful because the birds and the water itself appear to be avoiding her, she's still vulnerable because she hates what she is, what she's become. And I think that's one interesting thing. It's been a while since I've read Lovecraft deeply. I wanted to play with someone who became something that regretted it, which I don't know that he played with that a lot in his writing, at least none of the stories I can think of, because I wanted to give her a shred of humanity left, right? Almost remembering, what she used to be and how painful that memory is. And here I go again with a swirl of black, look back at her moving of its own accord. an entity separate and one with her. Her throat burned with acid, but she swallowed air. So I was playing with that because, as I mentioned previously, I think in another paragraph, that her sickness or her desire to vomit is kind of a remnant of her human past, and so she's beyond that. So I knew I had to get her to the doc, and that's what I'm doing here. And I'm using similes here where I'm comparing the severed ropes, which you can't really see in the painting, but there's two ropes tied to those dock posts up front, and I thought that would be an interesting element because ropes are very tentacle-like, and so I wanted her. I thought that was a really good element. Compare her to her tentacles, or at least have her internalize this struggle of the fact that she does have tentacles without saying tentacles. And this is a great example of how you can create this subtext and this meaning without specifically saying how someone feels. So thousands upon thousands of bites withering away fiber by fiber, two severed ends slaves to the whims of the current. So really, she's talking about herself. She's not really talking about the rope. And I've been trying to do that a lot more lately. Use an object, use a situation, use, it could be the sky, it could be a place, it could be just something the character sees, and they're kind of projecting themselves onto it and describing it in such a way that allows you to know how they truly feel about themselves, not so much about the object. And so I emphasize that again in this next paragraph: severed as she had been, then regrown again and again, multitudes enslaved as she had been. So I'm a little bit on the nose there. I probably could have removed that completely, and I think you would have still gotten the same idea, but I wanted to emphasize it. So it was kind of a nice echo for the previous paragraph. And then I decided, okay, well, I need to talk about her head. So her scalp chilled. And what I did is, rather than her just like touch her head or show her head, or start describing it from her POV, something had to happen to that, right? So we have a spray we see these waves happening or crashing, and so we know that a mist is going to happen. So I thought that would be a good opportunity to have this cold water hit her scalp, because if she had hair, or if you don't have hair, possibly what the difference is between water on a head full of hair is versus a bald scalp. And so I used that device to bring attention to her scalp without just making it feel random, because I think that would have felt off to me if I just started randomly talking about her scalp. But I wanted to address it because it does have those interesting features. And because I couldn't, except for lines, scars, disturbances, she removed her hand and wiped it on her gown. So I didn't really know what they were. So I was very abstract with it. It could have been a lot of those things. This is when I start driving home. So I'm at 600 words or around there. And I don't know where I was going to go with this, but I finally decided for her to start to regain her memory. And so it's telling her of this man, not a lover or friend, a caretaker, footprints it couldn't wash away, a hole it couldn't shatter, tied to a dock it couldn't splinter, meaning all of these memories cannot be destroyed. That's sort of the message there. And who this man is, I kind of left to be a mystery. But what I did is, perhaps as far as it wished to go, perhaps to the other side of the world, to another world where there was no color, just shades from white to black, which is essentially describing where she is now. And I go back later to have this man essentially get a gift, basically, which is the weight on her arm that you see here, the weight that settled at her wrist, heavy, tugged her down. And so I wanted this artifact to become, I thought at first, I was like, well, maybe it's like a personal item. Maybe it's the last shred of what, who she had been, what her possessions might have been. And this was it. And I think that would have been powerful as well, but I decided instead to make it the catalyst for her, her transformation, essentially. And what I did is I decided to make her kind of this, like, I don't know, free spirit, sort of independent woman, where she likes to go out to this, or girl, I guess I call her, but go out to the sea and just kind of dance in the waves. And she just really relishes in the fact that there's these stormy skies and cold, where most people are turned away from that. So I thought that would be an interesting differentiator, to get her alone on this beach, and possibly these stormy skies were a Lovecraftian nature, meaning something's happening, it's a symbol of something otherworldly. But and here I go on to describe exactly what she is she said yes, had said yes, meaning she's communicating with these stars to bring her these gifts and these promises. Because that's, as we know, that's how a lot of these Lovecraft stories go, is that these elder gods promise, their followers or worshipers that they will be given such power, et cetera, et cetera. But there's always a catch, and that catch being she has been transformed into this creature. And so now she's just really, fine. This is the final. I need to get her to the water. I decided I wasn't sure if I was going to leave her here to just think about what she'd become, but I thought it was a good idea to get her into the water. So it's almost like she's on the beach as she was as a girl. She makes the dock, which triggers memories. And then finally, she just completely gives in to something she cannot fight, concedes to her fate, being at the depths of the ocean, kind of leaving behind herself. So it's kind of like a evil sort of reverse Little Mermaid, I guess. And here, I tried to talk about her gown, because she does have this flowing gown, and it looks like she's taking it off. It's sliding away, and so I really like that, because even though it ties into her tentacles, it's sort of like her shedding the last bit of her humanity. And so I thought that would be a good trigger for her to do before she went to the sea, because you have no need for clothes in the sea. Only humans need clothes, and she is no longer human, and so she is shedding it. What I did in the edit, which you're seeing right now, is I wanted to end with a name too, because I started with a name. So I ended it with this infinite void of space, because she's going into the darkness. But then I thought, well, I started with a name, let's end with a name. And I added a little bit more context or information to this mystery man, meaning, he was sort of a master of the sea, and he could travel anywhere. And it almost appears as if he went somewhere and got this bracelet and gave it to her as a gift. So whether or not this person was her father, or just a random, a caretaker, maybe a stepfather or an uncle or something like that, I wanted to make sure that there was nothing specific about any of this, because I wanted this woman's, or this creature's, memories to be kind of clouded, essentially, not remembering every single detail about how everything went, because I think that is the power of it, is when you know that she can't conjure every single memory. She can't recall it. She can recall enough to make it tragic for herself. That is really all I wanted to do. And the benefit of that is that you don't have to think of all those details. You don't have to know those details. And one thing I try to remind myself often is that, yes, it is good to know things that never make their way onto the page, but it's also okay to never know them if they never come up. As long as you have an idea, or sort of a rough target of what something might mean, I think that's good enough, especially if you never write it down, because there's a mystery to you, and there's a mystery to the reader. And I think a lot of times when you know every single detail, you're very tempted to put it on the page. And I highly recommend you to create as much mystery as you can, without being too just opaque with it. Like, you want to give the reader answers, but you don't want to answer every question, because that just makes for a very boring story. It doesn't leave the reader with thoughts in their head, right? That's really what I want to do. I want, when someone finishes one of my stories or my novels, I want to make them think. I want to make them feel. And when you give them all of the answers and explain every little detail, that really doesn't do that, because you need to have that emotional mystery. And that's what I always try to achieve when I write. But on that note, I am working my way. This took not too bad. I think it was an hour 16, something like that. So just have 3 more words to go. And yeah, this one was different. I hadn't tackled Lovecraft yet. And so this was a good way to do it in such a way that wasn't obvious. Welcome to the end, dear viewer. I am so glad you made it. So this story, what do I think about it? What do I like? What don't I like? What did I learn from it? Well, as many of these stories begin, or I should say all of them, I don't really know where they're going. Sometimes I have a spark of an idea. This one I did not. There wasn't a lot to work from in the artwork itself, meaning there wasn't much of a conflict between two people. After reading it and after hearing myself talk about it, I think that's my one regret, is that there wasn't really much conflict here. There was conflict, it was internal conflict, and I think that that's really all I could do with it, right? She was disgusted by what she had become. She was clawing for these memories, these fragments of memories that she didn't quite grab hold of. She didn't get all the details. And that's another thing I did like about it, or well, the first thing I did like about it was that I didn't quite explain everything. And I talked about this in the analysis where I think it's really important to leave mystery. You ask people if they want answers, and a lot of times when people watch a movie, read a book, play a game, and there's somewhat of an ambiguous ending or all the threads weren't explained, I know that most people say they want that, but trust me, they don't want that, because that is the element that keeps you wondering. It keeps the story in your head. And I think as a creator of any kind, a writer, a video game designer, a filmmaker, whatever it may be, you want your story to stick with these people. And really the only way I feel like you can do that is to not give everything away. Now, it's a fine line. You don't want to make the ending completely abstract and open-ended and indecipherable. You want to give them a little bit of something to where their subconscious can follow that breadcrumb to their own conclusions. But I also did mention that a lot of that, especially in this story, is that I didn't know the answers. I don't know, but I think it's okay, because if you paint enough of a picture and give enough information, that hopefully is enough for the reader or the viewer to come to their own conclusions, put these little puzzle pieces together. And that's one great thing about story is that, and I know a lot of people disagree with me on this, but it belongs to whoever is reading it or watching it. Once I hit publish, once I hand the manuscript to someone else, yes, I did have certain intentions, but I really hope that they find things that I did not expect. Because as we know, if you're a creator yourself, so much stuff comes out of your subconscious that creates patterns, and you don't really expect it all the time. Sometimes even after you've seen the entire manuscript, you start to see these little bits, these breadcrumbs that you left for yourself at the end to piece together to find a pattern. And as humans, we are wired for patterns. So whether or not those are actual patterns with meaning or not doesn't matter. If we ascribe meaning to those things, that's all that matters. And another thing I liked is that I didn't say tentacles once in this entire story. It's a Lovecraft story. There is a woman standing on a dock with many tentacles coming out from beneath her, beneath this cloaky garb of some kind. And I strayed away from it because she does not view it that way. I'm listening to a Chuck Palahniuk book on the craft of writing, and while I knew this tenet of writing, it really, the way he explained it really hit home. And that tenet is you need to describe everything from the POV character. He said something along the lines of, there is no one that's 6'2". There is no one that's small. There is a man who is too tall for his own good, or tall enough to hit his head on a door frame. That's the kind of stuff that you want to be describing your world as through the eyes of the character. So as much as you may want to come up with clever details or descriptions, remember it's always through the eyes of that character. And that's what I really took to heart here, is trying to describe herself and her experiences through her own lens. So she wasn't seeing tentacles. She was just seeing a distortion, a disfigurement of some kind. And it wasn't one thing, it was everything. And so that's why I didn't want to get into too much specificity, because as much as it's tempting to pull the camera back away from inside the skull, looking out through the eyes of the POV character, I didn't. I kept it right where it was. I guess with the exception of when I described the birds in the sky looking at her back, but that's a feeling once again, so maybe not. So I didn't like the lack of conflict. There was some internal conflict, a little bit, which was okay, but I view the story as almost a vignette of this person. Yes, there's a beginning, a middle, and an end, I think, so at least I succeeded there, but there wasn't as much conflict as I find in a lot of the stories I write. But that's okay. Sometimes there doesn't need to be a ton of conflict. But I've been waiting to write something like this for a long time, because I'm a massive Lovecraft fan, as depicted by my shelf, which I guess you can't see. I have a whole shelf of Lovecraft books. But a lot of the artwork I find is either made for a game or one of his books. And I love the fact that this creature could have existed in the world, but it didn't feel like it was from any one of those particular stories. So Tatiana, again, thank you so much. I love the creativity. I love your style. I look forward to what you do next. So that's it for me. I hope you enjoyed the story. If you want to support the channel, give me a like if you like the video, subscribe for more story-related content. Check out my live streams on Saturday and Sunday about 5 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. Check out my books. I have 2 of them out right now. Join my Discord. All these links are down in the description. And thanks again for watching. Keep reading, keep writing, and I will see you next week. Thanks. Bye. If you'd like to read the story in its non-video format, check the link in the description. I didn't edit anything else, promise. Thanks again.